Yeah, that should work out well.
Yeah.
Well, you know, a tornado has
And you know what
hit
Southwest
Lambert.
is going to say? Well, this is fun. You could still make it. Airport. Sorry. We don't have
And like, a third of Lambert. Well, you got tornadoes coming now. I'm not gonna fall.
Oh, it's only a 4?
Okay. Watch the map as it progresses. You don't see it come on the screen.
See, it just doesn't read well when
Time
she's
that
got it.
here. See, get to 1800. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, but there was some little pops in
Yeah.
there around 1630, 1700.
Yep.
Hey, Wayne, just think, those chairs in the airport are really comfortable.
They are.
You'll
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please take your seats? Our program is about to begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to St. Louis, and welcome to those joining us via YouTube. I'd like to remind everyone to silence your electronic devices, and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the National Board of the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. I ask you all to please rise for the invocation, following by the Pledge of Allegiance. Chaplain Mode, would you please come forward for the invocation? Is Chaplain Mode not with us? Okay, so why don't we just move forward to the pledge? Vice National Commodore Kirkwood, would you lead us, please, in the pledge?
Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you, Commodore Kirkwood. At this time, I would ask you to please join me in a moment of silence as each of us, in our own way, remember the members of the Coast Guard, active duty reserve, civilian, and auxiliary families standing the watch at home and abroad, and for all those who have crossed the bar. Thank you. You may be seated.
All right. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce the head table. Please hold your applause until I have read all the names. First, we have the National Commodore, Gus Formato. To his right, Rear Admiral Matthew Sibley, Deputy Commander, PAC Area. To his right, Commodore Linda Merriman, Deputy National Commodore, Information Technology and Planning. To her right, the Chief Director of Auxiliary, Captain Troy Glendy. Continuing to his right, Commodore Patrick Ferry, Deputy National Commodore, Atlantic Area West and Operations. On Commodore Formato's left, Vice National Commodore Mary Cookwood. To her left, Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin, Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy. To his left, Commodore Tiny Singler, Deputy National Commodore, Pacific Area and Recreational Boating Safety. To his left, Commodore Alan Fred, Deputy National Commodore, Atlantic Area East and Mission Support. There are also special guests who have taken time from their busy schedules to be with us at our national training. We have Captain Mode, who will be here, I'm sure, shortly. Captain Amy Beach, Director of Inspections and Compliance. and Captain Jeffrey Eldridge, Commander, Community Services Command. I am also pleased to welcome our ANACOs, Assistant National Commodore ForceCom Todd Monis, Assistant National Commodore Response and Prevention Rick Saunders, Assistant National Commodore Recreational Boating Safety Robert Lauer, Assistant National Commodore Performance and Student Programs Peter Jensen, Assistant National Commodore Diversity Tracy Schultz, Assistant National Commodore Information Technology Susan Davies, Assistant National Commodore Administrative Services Rick Milichek, and President National Association of Commodores Commodore Robert Lauer. And then, of course, to my right, we have our Chief Counsel over here, Bruce Kelton. And then we have Lieutenant Booth from BSX here. We also have YN1 Sam Tobler, Master Chief Travis Park, Commander Steve Minatulo, U.S. Coast Guard retired, Commander Stephen Keel, U.S. Coast Guard retired, Chief Petty Officer Zig Wilson, U.S. Coast Guard retired, and Mr. David Goff, Training Manager. And we are also pleased to have Randy Ernst from the Auxiliary National Supply Center. I'm not sure if he is in the room, but he is here out and about. And thank you to all the DIROCs and the OTOs that are able to join us today. Appreciate y'all. And a big welcome to these members of the Coast Guard family and friends. All right. Now for me to say them all over again. I'm going to call roll. National Commodore Gus Formato.
Here.
Vice National Commodore Mary Kirkwood.
Here.
Immediate past National Commodore is not able to be with us. He had to leave out early. Chief Director Auxiliary Captain Troy Glendye. Deputy National Commodore Atlantic Area East and Mission Support Alan Fred.
Here.
Deputy National Commodore Atlantic Area West and Operations Pachter Ferry. Deputy National Commodore Pacific Area and Recreational Boating Safety Tiny Singler. Deputy National Commodore Information Technology and Planning Linda Merriman.
Here.
District Commodore 1st Northern John Hume. District Commodore 1st Southern Michael West. District Commodore 5th Northern Kurt Sarek. District Commodore 5th Southern John Krogman. District Commodore 7th District John Holmes. District Commodore 8th Coastal Region Peter Scamato. District Commodore 8th Eastern Chris Whitaker. District Commodore 8 Western Rivers Brock Stevens. District Commodore 9th Central Patricia Mitrowski. District Commodore 9 Eastern Richard Evans. District Commodore 9 Western Sonny Thatch. District Commodore 11 Northern Curtis Hahn. District Commodore 8 Southern Michael Bozarth. District Commodore 13th District Danny Kinley. District Commodore 14th District Michael Keurig. District Commodore 17th District Marion Parrish. And President National Association of Commodores Robert Lauer.
Mr. Kelton, will you attest to the presence of a quorum? Thank you. Welcome to our National Board meeting of March 2023. The theme for this meeting is Integrity, Inclusion, and Inspire. What a coincidence. Those are my watchwords. I hope that each of you finds your time here spent worthwhile, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize my absolutely outstanding, incredible staff. The planning for this event started almost a year ago, and the time, the hours, the dedication that went into making this happen were clueless to me until very recently, and I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate each of these people and how much they mean to me. I'd first like to recognize Conference Administrator Dee Hendrickson, Conference Coordinator Bob Hendrickson, our audio and visual team, Patrick Brown, Chris Harshfield, and Stephen Yancey, Our conference staff, Commodore Gary Barth and Patrick Malone, and assisting is Paula Marcangelo. Our photographers, Robin Priestley and Emily Yancey. My aide, NACO aide, Bob Fabich. The assistant, EA, Kelly Crasilius, and my executive assistant, Terry Barth. I want to personally thank each of you for making this such a success and for your attention to detail. Without you, this certainly wouldn't be possible. Thank you.
And I would like to add, Kevin Redden has stepped up to help with photography also, so thank you, Kevin. Appreciate you. It is now my honor to introduce Rear Admiral Matthew Sibley. Admiral Sibley assumed the duties of Deputy Commander, Coast Guard Pacific Area in June 2022. He is responsible for coming to the podium early. Perfect.
We're good. All right. Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all today. It's an honor to be here. As Admiral Gautier started, I am also an AIM participant back in 1984. Seems like it was only yesterday, but it is a long time ago. I also, an opportunity to come here to St. Louis to do this worked really well. Unlike some of the others who are doing all this other Coast Guard business here, I was visiting my retirement home 20 miles west of here in Lake St. Louis and working on my DIY projects. So appreciate being able to come out here, spend a couple extra days getting ready for that endeavor. Yesterday, Admiral Gautier talked a little bit about, what's going on in the Pacific region. And I just want to expound on that for a couple minutes or so here. About 10 days ago, I got back from 5 weeks on the road. Some of it was in the Pacific Northwest, doing surf stations, hit a couple of the commanding officer conferences for sectors and air stations. But I spent 2 weeks out in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, talking to their navies, talking to their coast guards, engaging with the ASEAN leadership at the U.S. mission. And, my big takeaway from all of those efforts and those engagements out there is everybody wants, more Coast Guard. And what we bring to the table as a collective organization is just tremendous. Got to spend some time with, an auxiliarist out there in Singapore. Knew he was there, but that's still, we see where things are expanding and where people are just doing great things. And I think that's the big takeaway. And, as Admiral Tianson is fond of saying, when we look at, where is the future of the Coast Guard, we would say the future of the Coast Guard is in the Pacific. You can see a lot of, from a geopolitical and strategic area, we are expanding out there. You heard about the Indo-Pacific support cutter that's going out there. We talk about fast response cutters. We've got fast response cutters deploying out of Honolulu and Guam, and then soon out of LALB going down south to the Eastern Pacific. Those cutters are transiting, thousands of miles on their own with nothing but blue water around them, and they're getting downrange to work with Pacific Island countries. And this is all really in the, when you talk about the efforts from the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategies, and our own Coast Guard strategy, it points to the multi-trillion-dollar economic effort that goes through the Pacific. And it is not just about the PRC and Russia out there. This is all about emerging markets and where they're operating. And it's also about, our value to the region, which comes in the maritime governance perspective. And you talk about all of these, Pacific Island nations. Some are small, some are, Australia. And what they bring to the table and what their challenges are when you talk about things like climate change. And climate change affects all of it from, different fish stocks migration and where they're going. It's not just the heavy weather. It's not just that, islands are in fear of losing, their ability to be an island. because of rising water. So it's, the Coast Guard brings a lot to that table, and what we bring is we're smaller assets. We are more into, we bring a law enforcement perspective. We bring that humanitarian assistance, disaster response piece to it, and it's a great complement to what our other United States military services or our friends in the region. So that when we show up, we bring more. We engage in the culture, and we can work with those folks. So, one of the things that Admiral Tiansen talks a lot about, and he wishes he could be here, but he's on his he's out in Alaska and heading back to quick brief stopover in Alameda before he heads on to the East Coast this weekend. But his three command philosophy pieces are strategic leadership, proficiency, and teamwork. And he really ties those into everything we do out there. And I would say the biggest thing that we're doing right now is creating a theater campaign plan for all of Pacific area. And it's a kind of a different way of looking at it, a little bit towards what our DoD brothers and sisters do, but it's taking a whole look at what PAC area does and what the Coast Guard does in the Indo-Pacific region. So it'll give us an opportunity to kind of lay out our lines of effort, deconflict where we are and what we're doing, and then we'll have this overarching plan, kind of an umbrella with each district will have their plan underneath. So it's an effort. One of the things we really learned a lot during COVID, and as COVID and the region was starting to reopen, is that we didn't have a lot of coordination in who was doing what and where. So we're getting ready to roll out this theater campaign plan next month in April, and it'll give a direction for all of us, kind of make sure that as we crawl, walk, and run throughout the region, that we're kind of doing so in a coordinated and compatible fashion. And also part of that is taking a look at innovative approaches to operations. Just like DCO talked yesterday, and CG Cyber talked a little bit yesterday about the auxiliary and what they do and what you do and how it's changed. We're doing the same thing, and we're looking at everything really from a risk to mission, risk to force viewpoint on where we're operating and how we're doing it. And what's really great is when you think about what land area is doing and what PAC area is doing, it's very compatible. And Admiral Lunde and Admiral Tiansen work really closely to make sure that the guidance that we're giving out to our teams are consistent and understanding where we want to accept that risk and engaging with others. As I'm sure you've heard, and as a common topic throughout the Coast Guard now, whether it's active duty reserve or even in our civilian world, we've got shortfalls and gaps in where we are operating and how we're operating, and where we can accept that risk and take that risk and pull some of those decisions we're pushing down to the operational commanders. Some of those we're pulling up for notification because there's just Congress that we have to make sure that we're meeting their intent in the laws and things that are going there. So that's kind of where PAC area is, what we're kind of leaning forward on, and where we're going. But when we talk about the auxiliary in Pacific area, 20 years ago, I think the scope of auxiliary service was limited to a handful of things. Boat crew, vessel exams mainly. But now we see the auxiliary taking on many more things than we ever thought possible. And we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but just a couple of highlights from Pacific area. In D11 North, auxiliarist Bard Mansinger successfully completed a 2-year auxiliary cutterman program under the leadership of Senior Chief Agiza on the Hawksbill. That's just tremendous, and that is really a dedicated effort to getting there. In January, we had auxiliaries deployed on the Spencer for AFRICOM to fulfill the interpreter role. When we operate, I would say as we deploy our cutters throughout the Pacific region, specifically in Oceania or out to the South and East China Sea, the biggest crew augmentee that we are constantly working towards is having an interpreter. And sometimes more than one, depending on where we're operating and what's needed. And, you know, for a guy that kind of is almost getting the English thing right, you know, those with language skills are absolutely critical. You know, we've got, you know, Auxiliaris made history as the first Auxiliaris to plant the auxiliary flag on the North Pole aboard Coast Guard cutter Healy. You know, Auxiliaris Deborah Cordone volunteered over 4,000 hours of public affairs service on Healy during their trip to the North Pole. I mean, wow, if that's just, you know, I mean, getting to go to the North Pole is really, you know, kind of cool. And having seen some of the pictures and seeing what they, you know, the northern lights and all that stuff up in that, you know, the whiteness, but dedicating 4,000 hours to doing the public affairs, just tremendous. And the return on that investment for the Coast Guard writ large is absolutely huge as we look at how we operate up in the Arctic. You know, mentioned a little bit about the, you know, the Culinary Assistance Program in D13 contributed over 3,200 hours of culinary support to Coast Guard units. I mean, that's just, you know, an area that we are incredibly short on is our culinary specialists in the Coast Guard right now. And getting, you know, we are working, you know, the culinary support folks in the auxiliary are huge. We're working with other countries to try and gain some support there. You know, a happy crew is a well-fed crew. So, you know, that goes a long way. You know, out in D14 last year, the auxiliary provided over 24,000 hours of volunteer work, you know, with 450 hours in air flights, 476 hours of culinary assistance, as well as, you know, lots of the rest in more of the traditional roles. But, you know, being out in D14 for a couple of years, you know, being able to have that, the aviation aspect of the auxiliary there is just tremendous. Simple as going from, you know, one island to the next really makes a difference in how we can get around out there. You know, this April up in the 17th District, the Director of Auxiliary and 3 AUX members are going to deploy to remote villages well above the Arctic Circle to participate in Kids Don't Float program. You know, this is just another effort of outreach that the folks up in D17 are doing to really engage some of those remote villages and bring them more into, you know, understanding some of the hazards of what goes on up there. Auxiliarist Lisa Larkin currently deployed aboard the Polar Star for 6 months down south. I mean, what a great opportunity and a, you know, in my mind, a trip of a lifetime. But even more so, get to go to Antarctica and then for the first time in years coming up through South America and getting stops in Chile and places we haven't been for, you know, well over a decade. Alaska former state senator Holland deployed as a culinary assistant aboard the Douglas Denman for 2 weeks. You know, it was his first deployment as a CA, and he's looking forward to doing it again. You know, what a great way to get you know, a former politician out there and then help recruit for us up in Alaska, where you know, it's certainly one of our strategic areas of operation. So, you know, I think you know, as we talk about, you know, the auxiliary, and you know, I go back to my time up in Wisconsin at Sector Lake, Michigan. I'd like to say a few years ago, but it's over a decade now. But you know, that was an area where I really got to learn and know the you know, the auxiliarists up there around Lake Michigan. And I think, you know, my big takeaway from all of that and what I continue to see is, you know, it is an effort that kind of goes both ways. You know, we learn from each other. I learned more from the team that was up there at the time as I think that they learned from us. So it really is great. So I was getting ready to fly out here at SFO last weekend. I ran into a couple of auxiliaries that were coming to St. Louis. And, you know, one of them was telling me a story about, you know, had a career, international, traveling all over the world, but joined the auxiliary and got to do things that he never thought he'd ever get to do. Got to meet people and be engaged in you know, different events out in the Bay Area. And he said, you know, one of the things that we don't really talk about a lot is some of the cool things you get to do, like, you know, meeting a commandant and hanging out with her a little bit, or, you know, engaging with others. So I really, you know, that to me was something that was just, you know, it was great to hear, because I think, you know, I truly feel that that goes both ways, because we get to learn from a lot of what you do, particularly, you know, even sitting at dinner last night or lunch today and just hearing about, you know, where people are, what they do, or what you have in common. And it's, to me, it's absolutely fascinating what you all bring to the table from, you know, your personal life, your professional life, and, you know, your life supporting the Coast Guard as a volunteer in one of the, you know, the best volunteer organizations in the world. So, you know, I think the last thought I would leave you with is just a simple to say thank you. You know, we can't do what we do. I can tell you that Pacific area can't do what they do without having auxiliaries. It is just absolutely fascinating when you have, you know, the full team on board some of these cutters. So thank you very much.
It is my pleasure to introduce the Chaplain of the Coast Guard, Captain Daniel L. Mode. Captain Daniel L. Mode earned his undergraduate degree in philosophy in 1988.
That's not what we strategized about.
I know, but I wanted to give you time to walk up.
I said I would cede my time of the bio for a prayer. I heard you didn't have a prayer this morning, so you have an invocation and a benediction, beginning and end. We're kind of in the middle, so is that a medio oration? So maybe I've invented a new prayer. But I know we've got some weather coming in, and we want to pray for not only us here, but truly throughout our area for the souls here. Maybe a little prayer. Heavenly Father, in thanksgiving for all the blessings received, especially this time together, our time of fellowship, and truly leadership, so that we can guide our auxiliary and truly our Coast Guard into the future. We truly pray in this time that we know you are master of all things, including our weather. May your hand guide us this day, not only here in this conference center, but throughout these counties, and keep us safe. And we ask this blessing in your holy and abiding name. Amen. Amen. Thank you for that. So when I arrived here, by the way, this is only my second time I've had the joy and opportunity to address this august organization. The first time was in Orlando back in August. And I've now been the chaplain of the Coast Guard for 11 months, almost a year. And the first thing I was asked when I arrived yesterday afternoon was a question I'd not been asked in 11 months. And I found it a very interesting question to ask me. When was the first time you ever heard the word auxiliary Coast Guard? And immediately I thought back to 2009. I was at the academy, and I was on the Bark Eagle. And there I was for a week, enjoying myself on the Bark Eagle, out with our cadets on the high seas, and being fed 3 squares a day. It wasn't until the end of that time at sea for a week that I found out the people behind the galley were auxiliarists. And I said, what is this animal that would come at sea, not just for that week, but for the whole summer, and care for all the crews that would come on board and feed us? And oh, by the way, for this much money, nothing. And I said, tell me more about the auxiliary Coast Guard. And so that was my very first introduction to who and what you are. Truly people who are willing to serve, but I would say even beyond that, sacrifice. You know how everybody comes up to us when they see us in uniform, like in this hotel or in the airport, and they say, thank you for your service. I want you to know they're really saying thank you for your sacrifice, for you willing to take that position, that job, that billet for nothing, for standing the watch on a weekend or on a holiday weekend, for missing that anniversary or birthday, whether you're active duty or auxiliary. Not only thank you for your service, thank you for your sacrifice. Today I want to say thank you in many ways for that sacrifice. I want to say thank you to our Commodore and Vice Commodore, and truly the whole leadership of the auxiliary for what you've done for us, especially in the G Directorate. I want to say thank you for your commitment and your continued commitment, and I want to brag a little bit about our chaplains. I always say, when people say, how many chaplains do you have in the Coast Guard? Immediately, 157. I don't count them as reservist or active duty or auxiliarist. They are chaplains. I have 157 chaplains doing the mission of care of souls out there everywhere. It's a great honor to say thank you to all that and to brag upon them a little bit. Next slide, please. So these are my goals. I just told you them. It's really about thank you. Thank you for your sacrifice. Next slide, please. The first thing is the G Directorate. As Dr. Poole said this morning, it does stand for God in our eyes. It's great to be a godly witness and a minister out there amongst the whole Coast Guard. And that you've elevated us to this directorate gives us even more responsibility, but also ability to care and do it in an agile way and a quick way as a directorate. So thank you for that visionary idea and progressing us to being a directorate. We also thank you for that continued desire and ability to let us grow. It's an important thing. You've heard it through our Commandant. You've heard it through various admirals throughout this few days. The chaplaincy is needed now more than ever, and it's because of your help and visionary that we're able to continue to grow. Thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks. And it did work. Very good. Next thing I want to talk about is our foundation. The Coast Guard Foundation is phenomenal in how much support they've given us truly throughout the Coast Guard, but certainly within the Chaplain Corps. In the last 11 months, I spent $100,000 creating programs and initiatives to build resiliency throughout the Coast Guard. And a lot of those programs have been led by auxiliarist chaplains, our ACS chaplains. What an amazing gift they are in their ability to lead assist, safe talk, marriage retreats, resiliency retreats. But also, they have funded, in order to make our auxiliary chaplains even more capable and more professional, our training. They have allowed us to train 23 chaplains in ASSIST, which is a suicide prevention course, and 27 chaplains in CISM, which is a critical care after some destructive issue or traumatic experience that a crew has had out in the field. These are now more professionally trained people because we had the ability to fund them through the Coast Guard Foundation. I also want to say thank you to all those Coasties out there, and especially our auxiliary chaplains, for their leadership and being recognized. We have Dr. Poole, who received in Orlando and was awarded the Auxiliary Legion of Merit. We have ACS Chaplain Grace of D1, who was awarded the Auxiliary Achievement Medal, and ACS Chaplain Rick Braswell of D7, who was awarded the D7 Auxiliarist of the Year. There are some of their pictures up there. You've allowed us to serve, and you're thanking us for that service. Thank you. I want to talk about how we're expanding our vision to others. Fleet Forces is like DCO for the Coast Guard, so Deputy Commandant for Operations. So Fleet Forces controls all the fleets throughout the world of the Navy. A big operation and a big opportunity to care for souls with their chaplains, but they realize they don't have enough. So literally in the last few months, they've been asking us, and specifically Dr. Poole and Chaplain Tom Walcott, to yoke with them, to collaborate with them about what we do as auxiliary chaplains, and maybe develop a program for big Navy and Fleet Forces to imitate us and how we are able to provide that point of care need for that individual sailor or Coast Guardsman, because we expanded beyond just the limits of active duty chaplaincy to auxiliarist chaplains. So they're asking for it. Just this time last week, I met with the chaplain of the Coast Guard for the Philippine Coast Guard. It was a virtual meeting. We met for an hour. And he not only wanted to know how we do that care for especially assist, our resiliency programs, but also how we're able to have 157 chaplains. They only have 20 chaplains for 26,000 coasties in the Philippines. They need more. And so they're also looking at how can we expand their auxiliary program that they already have and include ministers in that. Again, exciting opportunities for us to not only be a help for ourselves within the Coast Guard, but truly a help internationally and within our own DoD. History of honoring others. This is a great story, and the first time I was able to tell this story was to Admiral Fagan a day after it happened. So the picture you see is of Diana Pullman Bell. 50 years ago, this coming July 2nd to be specific, she'll celebrate 50 years when she became the very first female chaplain in the DoD, and she became a Navy chaplain. She only served for 3 years in Orlando. At the time, it was a recruit boot camp, and she went on to continue her ministry, which she's been doing for the last 50 years. But she's been itching to get back to that. And I read an article about 4 months ago about her. She lives in Duluth, Minnesota. And the article talked about her reminiscing and getting ready to celebrate that 50th anniversary of becoming the very first female chaplain ever in the DoD. In it, it mentioned that she was starting to become interested in the flotilla right next to where she lived. And she's from Duluth, Minnesota. And I read that. I found out who the author of the article was. I contacted them at the newspaper. They got me in contact with Yana. I called her the next day, and I said, how would you like to put the uniform back on? You not only can be an auxiliarist, which you're thinking about and working on, but we'd love for you to be a chaplain again. She jumped at the chance. And in the next month or so, she'll become an ACS chaplain. She's just about there. What an amazing gift that is for us to not only celebrate her and her legacy, but also to increase our chaplains. She'll become the 13th female ACS chaplains that we have. You heard Dr. Poole mention that we're increasing our diversity with Buddhist chaplains and imams as well, Muslim chaplains. But she'll be a part of that legacy as well. What an amazing opportunity for us to serve again, to sacrifice. We're increasing our ability within the Catholic spectrum as well. As a Catholic priest, I'm using my abilities and gifts to be yoked to our Archbishop of the Military, who's Archbishop Broglio, and I've asked him to reinstate deacons within the ACS program, which was put on hold for many years. He has agreed, and we're now about to accept 6 more Roman Catholic deacons into the program. And the sky's the limit for that. Also, when I was in D9, or D8, excuse me, in Miami, I was able to bring the Archbishop of Miami along with Admiral McPherson in D8 to talk about all the work that we're doing in OVS with Cuban migration and Haitian migration. He has 3 Creole priests that can help our chaplains understand and enculturate better all this migration issues. So it was an amazing opportunity, again, for us to yoke with the Catholic Church and using my ability to connect and coordinate with Catholic leaders. I want to talk about all the service that we've done. You've heard the litany of so many people in operations supporting what we do every day in the Coast Guard. So too our auxiliarist chaplains do the same. Whether it's in OVS, we have a 2.0 presence of chaplains down there, and we're able to maintain 2 chaplains in Key West, in OVS, in the migration care, because we have auxiliarist chaplains. Almost every other time, it's an auxiliarist that we send down there. Right now, for the last almost 4 months, we have an auxiliarist filling an active duty gap in Puerto Rico, again, serving because of OVS. We have chaplains who've served on various cutters, the Harriet Lane, the Vigorous, the Diligence, the Reliance. Mentioned going up into the Arctic, of CSs going up there and PAOs going up there, a part of the auxiliary. We had an auxiliarist chaplain for 80 days serving on the Healy and got to stand on the North Pole. As he said, it was great. For the first time, the world revolved around me. Chaplain Lyle did a great job. We have them underway on the Eagle, the Maple, Southwest Border Operations. They're everywhere our active duty chaplains are, because we don't just have reservists and active duty and auxiliarists, we have 157 chaplains serving and caring and sacrificing for others. What a great joy that is. Finally, I want to talk about the opportunities for growth. As you heard, we're increasing the ability for deacons to now serve, Roman Catholic deacons in the auxiliary. We're bringing on Deanna Bell, who was a chaplain before as a Navy chaplain and continuing to serve. Just last week, I had the privilege to accept an Army First Lieutenant chaplain as an auxiliarist chaplain. Just last week, one of our chaplains who's been serving since 2020 as an auxiliarist was commissioned as a Navy Reserve chaplain and is going through chaplain school right now. And on April 14th, he will be a certified Navy chaplain as a reservist, but also as an auxiliarist. We're not only being able to professionalize our auxiliary chaplains, but now also professionalizing our chaplain corps in the Army and the Navy and other places too. What a great opportunity that is. In the last 11 months that I've been your chaplain, I've been able to accept 22 new chaplains to the auxiliarist program. 22. That's almost a 20% increase in the last 7 years of accepting chaplains. As you know, Chaplain Tom Walcott was our 100th currently serving chaplain that we've been able to accept. We've had yes. In the last 7 years, we've had 116 chaplains. Now, some of them, as Dr. Poole mentioned, have passed away, 2 of them recently. We've had others that have had to retire, and others that have moved on to other types of ministry. But we are currently continuing to keep those current 100 going. But today, I have the exciting news to tell you. We're going to increase that to 101 today. I'm going to, in front of your presence, right now, press this button, which is a send button. This is the email that Reverend O'Malley will receive within minutes to tell him that he has been selected as the newest ACS chaplain. And as Dr. Poole mentioned to you, it sometimes takes a long time for them to go through the process, to enter into a flotilla, to go through all the requirements to become an ACS chaplain. Oh, by the way, those are the exact same requirements to become an active duty Navy chaplain, except for age and the physical abilities. The same exact requirements. You have to be endorsed by a religious body. You have to have a master's of divinity or waived because of your experience. And most of them have 2 decades of experience of ministry, like Reverend O'Malley. And oh, by the way, he is serving exactly where we need him, in the most remote places in the Coast Guard. He's on the Oregon coast. Next week, I will be with our Vice Commandant on the Lost Coast, which is in Oregon, with all those stations. I'll be visiting 6 different Coast Guard stations throughout Oregon, and Reverend O'Malley, who will now become, as I press this button, an ACS chaplain. Welcome aboard. So again, my bottom line is thank you. Thank you for all your service. Thank you all your sacrifice. And I especially want to offer one Bravo Zulu today. Thank you, Dr. Poole, for your leadership over these 7 years, for your leadership to me over these 11 months that I've been the chaplain of the Coast Guard, and for helping us to continue to grow this amazing ministry, not only within the Coast Guard, but now internationally within our DOD, and truly for that end point of care to that one sailor or that one coastie that needs it most. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. For those of you who aren't aware, a long time ago, General George Patton requested his chaplain offer a prayer for moderate weather. And this afternoon, Father Mode did that for us. I think that puts us in very good company.
am now pleased to introduce Captain Jeffrey Eldridge. Captain Eldridge reported to the Community Services Command as the Executive Officer of the Coast Guard's Community Services Command in June of 2016 and assumed command in 2020. In this role, he is responsible for the leadership and operations of the Coast Guard Exchange and the Coast Guard's Morale, Wellbeing, and Recreation, MWR, programs. CGX is a non-appropriated fund instrumentally that provides centralized management for 64 CGX stores and 47 satellite exchange locations, and all the vending and concession services. CGX employs over 800 employees and has an average annual sales in excess of $175 million, providing an estimated $30 million in savings to military members and their families. Coast Guard MWR programs are responsible for providing community and recreational programs, activities, and services to the Coast Guard members, dependents, and other eligible patrons around the world, contributing to the mission readiness and the retention of service personnel. Captain Eldridge, we look forward to your presentation.
Thanks. Now you did half my presentation for me.
Oh, well, there you go.
Admiral Sibley, I'm Arging Senior Auxiliary Leadership. Thanks for giving me some time here today. I reflect to your words, your guidance, words of inclusion, and the total Coast Guard workforce and the folks that we support. The auxiliary is certainly right up there, and we want to make sure we can fly the CSC flag, let you know what services and benefits are available to all of you. So I'm going to go through a few slides and tell you and show you some of the things that we do. We are how many people had heard of the Coast Guard Exchange, or I'm sorry, the Community Services Command? Community Services Command, a few? You? Admiral Sibley, you were on my board before, so I hope you had. I was eyeballing you to see if you'd say it. So we are a for-benefit enterprise. We look to maximize the readiness, retention, and resiliency of the total Coast Guard workforce. And we do that through the exchange system, and then the profits of the exchange system, we provide the MWR program and provide all those MWR programs for everybody. Like I said, folks thinks of us as an exchange, and a lot of times we are small stores and closets on smaller bases, and then what people don't know is we do have a couple of behemoth stores, a 55,000 square foot store in Centerville, opened in 2019, a 43,000 square foot store in Chesapeake, opened in 2009, and then of course we provide all the funding and support for the Coast Guard cutter, the exchange on the Coast Guard cutters. And when something goes boom or bust, we send out the deployable support exchanges to all over the country. On the MWR side of the house, we do a lot of the traditional program management, getting funding and support for billets and all that kind of stuff, and then oversight of those food and beverages, lodging facilities that are all over the Coast Guard at different facilities. And then we do the Armed Forces sports programs. Micah Bonner, you in here? No? Oh, so he's one of our poster children for Armed Forces sports, and he's been a basketball coach, serving as a coach of the Navy team, and we do have our own rugby team, and we have new this coming year, maybe some auxiliaries will put in for this, Coast Guard golf team, competing against the other services. So look for information coming forward on that. On the NAF Center of Excellence aspect, we have about 800 exchange employees. The Coast Guard has about 1,500 non-appropriated fund employees. So folks that are flipping burgers at the restaurants up in Kodiak to the athletics coaches at the Coast Guard Academy, they're all technically non-appropriated fund employees. All their payroll, all their human resources, they all come back through Community Services Command to make sure our people are treated right. The exchange in the big picture, I think Kelly had an old number of 175 million because we're growing. Last year we did 257 million in sales, and we returned $18.9 million at the bottom line. When we do that, then I brief the non-pay compensation board of directors, which is CG1, CG8, several other flag officers, senior executives, and we determine how to split those funds up. And 2.2 million goes out to each individual unit to have Coast Guard parties, or Coast Guard Day parties, or Christmas celebrations, whatever they wish. And then $6 million recently has been going to recapitalize gyms, MWR facilities typically. Whether or not you're talking sports courts, new basketball courts, new outdoor fitness areas, we've been pumping a lot of money into that. And then we recapitalize our exchange system. On the MWR side of the house, there's really three types of categories of MWR programming. You got category A, which most bases have some sort of level of fitness, well-being stuff. Category B is some of those that are not fully revenue generating, so they're never going to pay for themselves, but they provide good camaraderie. So they're supported by some appropriated funds. That includes hobby shops, theaters, bowling alleys. And then lastly is the category C stuff, which is revenue generating, no appropriated funds really supporting them. That's the food and beverages, the lodging, the golf courses in Kodiak and Cape Cod. One of the big calls I want to make sure everybody knew is the coastguardmwr.org website. That's where you're going to find all Coast Guard lodging listed. And we've got some really prime real estate that folks don't know about. Kodiak, it's a great location to go out fishing in the summers. You've got Hillsborough Inlet, which is right on the beach, right? You've got out in ski resorts there. Tahoe has Station Lake Tahoe's got some great locations. So these are highly encouraged. Next, we've got the AmericanForcesTravel.com, which is basically Priceline.com leftovers and available to all military members. They actually had to go through, and the next slide here will show you has your logo on it. Hopefully that's the right logo. And there's an authentication way for you guys to go through and auxiliaries to go through and get your tickets, your leisure travel tickets, cruises, sporting events, all through that website. And when those sales come through, they actually provide a stipend back to the Community Services Command, and then we push those funds out to the respective geographic area responsibility that they came from. And today's the new benefit. This has been a long time in the making. So historically, auxiliarists had limited shopping privileges in the Coast Guard exchange system. And we were pushing forward to expand benefits to full based on your support of the military workforce. And right as we were having the approvals, we were getting ready to pull the trigger, we had the pandemic hit. And honestly, our supply chains were wrecked and we were focused on other issues. But as I approach my retirement, this has been on the hill and on the tee, and we're officially knocking it off. So my staffs have been trained and they're ready to go. So auxiliarists in the past, you'd walk in, you wouldn't be able to buy alcohol, tobacco, spirits. Now you are authorized, and you're going to get the same privileges that every person in the Coast Guard uniform has. The last bit I talk about is put your money where your morale is. Kind of tell you the story about how the exchange system works. We are trying to provide support for the military workforce. Certainly, if you go into Walmart or Amazon, they have those things that are about the same price, or you have to use our price match guarantee to get the same price and not pay taxes. You're helping support that ecosystem that gives back to the Coast Guard workforce. So I really support you. If you don't have stuff in your local store, talk to the exchange managers. There's product that they can get through our other infrastructures and do special orders or whatnot. So we are your store, everybody's store, and I welcome questions at any time to make sure that we are answering your store because we serve for you. If there are any questions, I'll be around, or I can be found via email. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you, Captain Eldridge. It is my pleasure to introduce Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin. Admiral Arguin serves as the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy and is responsible for the development of national policy, standards, and programs promoting marine safety, security, and environmental stewardship. 3 directorates carry out the mission: inspections and compliance. Keep going? Okay.
Finish your sentence there.
Okay. Marine
We got an hour.
transportation systems and commercial regulations and standards.
And I'm the admiral for the auxiliary, so.
And more importantly,
So good, bad, or indifferent. If it's great, I'm your guy. If it's not, I'm your guy. Well, it is a great opportunity, a great honor to be here. NACO, VNACO, and the entire leadership team of the auxiliary. I think the last time again was in August in Orlando. I too was brand new to the job, kind of trying to figure out what was going on. At least brand new to 5P, but my prior job was 5PC, where again I was your captain, along with Troy Glendy, and now Amy Beach has taken on that responsibility. And rather than go through a number of, you've heard from every flag officer, I'm not going to tell you anything new about what's going on. I figure what I would do is give you a little sense of what's happening within the prevention program, and then talk about a little bit of where we're going to give you a sense for where I might need some help within the prevention portfolio, but then also reinforce our commitment, my entire team's commitment, the team that's back there's commitment, to reducing those barriers that were talked about. You know, from my perspective, you give your time, your effort, your focus, we ought to find ways to reduce the burden that is administrative, to be able to put the suit on, to be able to go out and put steel on target. Whether you're a chaplain, a cook, whether you're doing boating safety, whether you're doing barge inspections, that's what I'm paying you for. I'm not paying you to sit behind a computer screen, fill out paperwork, and try and figure out and justify your existence to get into this great organization. And so we're constantly looking for ways to minimize that administrative burden so that you can maximize your volunteer time. I caveat that with I do work for the federal government, so paper and burden is a bit of the bureaucracy, but I'm very much interested in trying to find ways to streamline that process, because the last thing I want is we get a fish on the line and it takes us forever to get them in and they get off the line. We see the same thing with even on our, you heard it from the Commandant from MCPOG, the challenges that we have, just getting that talented workforce, that limited group of folks that has the propensity to serve, the willingness to serve, and then we go through a really long process to try and get them in the door. And that really does put pressure on our ability to get the right talent, because everybody wants that talent. If it's easier for you to go do something else, chances are you're going to. So I want to find ways to eliminate that. So just to sort of paint a picture within sort of the ecosystem of prevention, my responsibilities are to manage the policy development, to manage risks within the marine transportation system. In the United States, the marine transportation system is responsible for $5.4 trillion of national economic prosperity, and it also serves for us to be able to develop the force that we need to project our power internationally. And so the policies that I work and my teams are working toward are looking to ensure that people that are working within the marine transportation system are able to deliver their goods and wares in the most safe, efficient manner possible, and so that those mariners that are at sea go home with the same number of fingers and toes that they started with. It's a pretty simple sort of idea, but there's no greater sort of example of why the MTS matters than not only during COVID, but certainly during the supply chain disruption that we were all sort of paying attention to out in LALB, right? All of a sudden, people are like, we've got tons of ships that are sitting out there, and I can't get my PlayStation, or I can't get my Nikes, or whatever it is that you've ordered, because now we've become comfortable, or we've become used to, during COVID, sitting in our basement, in our pajamas, flip-flops, ordering whatever it is, and then the expectation is that next morning it's going to show up on my doorstep. And the supply chain really is, that LALB situation really did expose the fragility of that supply chain and the expectation for increasing demands on that supply chain, which is already sort of at its breaking point. And so understanding that, understanding what policies and procedures need to be put in place, really what we're seeing is we're seeing an increased demand. 90% of everything in this entire place, I would argue in this entire hotel, at one way, shape, or form came across water, right? Whether raw materials or the finished product, 90% of that, the stuff here, came across water, right? It's the most efficient, effective way to deliver cargo, to move goods and services. And so we're going to continue to see ideas and pressure to increase that throughput. On top of that, we've got an increased demand signal across the globe to reduce the carbon footprint. We're sitting here potentially getting some tornadoes. Those things are, you see a bunch more with respect to hurricanes and floods and snowstorms and mudslides. All of those things are being driven by a dramatic increase in our environmental footprint. And globally, there's strong pressure to reduce that carbon footprint, and maritime plays a part in that. And so you're gonna see alternative fuels. Right now, our staffs are looking at, gone are the days where you're using sort of the last leg of a bunker, sort of this really dirty fuel. So you see a ship and they fire their engine up and you see this big black plume of smoke come out. In the future, you won't see that. That emission that comes from shipping will become more and more clean. We're working on systems right now that are going to be alternative dual fueled using LNG and diesel combined in existing systems. We're using the potential exists for fully fueled ammonia ships, which comes with its own challenges with just the toxicity. There are actually designs today that are at least preliminary for nuclear powered propulsion systems for towboats. 5 years ago, I'd have laughed you out of this room if you told me you were going to have a nuclear battery pack that you just stuck on a towboat that would be running up and down the Mississippi River. All of those things require increased technology, increased understanding of complex systems that my staffs are going to have to understand, industry's going to have to understand, all being driven to a zero carbon footprint. Across the entirety of the rest of the portfolio, you heard Jay Van talk about the challenges with cyber. Every one of those new complex systems that require computers and telemetry all expose vulnerabilities within that system that have to be protected and then be understood if there's vulnerabilities that impact that system. And so we're going to need that same capability to be able to help us meet all of those existing demands for services. On the same front about reducing carbon footprint, you've probably heard about the strong desire to go with wind energy. And so around the nation right now, there's a significant pressure to build out spaces where you have wind farms in the ocean where there weren't wind farms before, where there weren't obstructions. My responsibility is to balance the development of that wind farm, but also still preserve those shipping lanes that make our economy move. And that is a challenge across the entirety of the federal government. That's a challenge with an entirely new industry that's trying to bring green energy to the United States and meet the president's stated goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030. Last time I checked, that's like 7 years from now. We've got 7 actual turbines that are spinning. There's no way we're going to get to 30 by 30 if we're not really pressured into that space, and there's a lot of construction that has to happen. Additionally, so across the portfolio, every one of those things means that my teams have to be prepared to be in a position to provide compliance and demonstrate an understanding of the policy both internationally and domestically, but then also be able to understand these new technologies and be able to provide an oversight role on top of that. In an existing system right now that I'm already pressured to try and train the next generation of marine inspectors, investigators, and waterways managers. One of the other areas that we're really sort of stepping out in is the use of data. Data analytics, the Commandant stood up an Office of Data Analytics. The federal government captures a significant amount of information. We use really not that much of it in an effective way to make decisions. And so the Office of Data Analytics is really going to serve to help us use all that information that comes in and make better risk-informed decisions based on that information. We're going to need data evangelists and data scientists and ops research folks that can help us shape the future with the development of policy. And so I think that's another opportunity, along with cyber, sort of this next generation of people that like computers and like data. My son's in data research right now, and I can't stand it. I mean, I can't stand looking at numbers anymore. I'm an engineer, but I'm glad there are accountants, and I'm glad there are people that can do that kind of work. But those are the people that are going to be driving business decisions in the future, right? And so having access to that next generation of talent, the folks that we are all going to be able to interact with, to lead them into a position where they can come to us. We can provide them with opportunities that may not be traditional opportunities, even in the Coast Guard. 5 years ago, cyber was not a thing, right? We weren't creating cyber graduates from the Coast Guard Academy. There were people that were playing around with computers, but everybody went to sea, and if you weren't on a 110 or if you weren't on an FRC, you were kind of right secondary. But we are now developing folks across the entirety of the portfolio, across the entirety of the 11 mission sets. We've got to have talented individuals that can meet the demands of the Coast Guard going forward. One other area that really has taken up a significant amount of my time is this issue of mariner shortages. I mentioned that we were all probably being able to benefit from being in, isolation, if you will, didn't have to go out and chase the COVID bug. But mariners were working, our Coast Guard was working, the folks that work within the marine transportation system worked every single day throughout the entirety of the pandemic. Otherwise, you wouldn't have got those Nikes. You wouldn't have got the fuel that you needed, the food that you needed. They are the unsung heroes of the pandemic, in my opinion. Had mariners decided to say, you know what, I'm going into my basement too, there is no way that we as a world would have come out of COVID in the way that they delivered much needed supplies and vaccines, all doing so at their own risk. We also didn't do a whole lot to help them out, right? We left mariners on ships for months, years at times, right? 12, 14-month hitch. They could not leave their ship. And so it's no surprise to me that those mariners, when they were finally able to get off the ship, said, I think I'm going to try something else. This really wasn't a great experience. So there's significant issues with mariner mental health issues and challenges with sexual assault and sexual harassment in the industry. And so we have really pressed forward into eliminating that type of toxic behavior from the system. My view as a chief of prevention, we talked about this last night, I candidly say as a chief of prevention, my job is to put response out of business. Every policy that I think about every day is focused on preventing the bad thing from happening. If I can not need to launch a helicopter, not need to send a response crew out into harm's way, that's a better solution than the alternative, right? And so if I can eliminate that toxic behavior, every single person that's on a ship today has a very specific safety-sensitive duty that I want them 100% focused on doing. And if somebody is treating them unfairly, somebody is treating them in a way that's going to distract them, that's my business, right? That's a safety issue. Somebody's making the turn going around Algiers Point, and they're not listening to the pilot because they're worried about somebody touching them or doing something uncomfortable with them, and they miss that turn and they hit the bridge, that's a big deal, and I own that responsibility. And so driving that kind of behavior out of the system is going to take a significant effort, not only culturally for the industry, but for our own workforce to hold those accountable, put them under the jail. If there's a criminal act, we are committed 100%. There is zero daylight between me and the Commandant, me and the Maritime Administrator, to hold those perpetrators accountable, to eliminate them from the system so that that system can be worked safe and securely, and that everybody sees themselves in a valuable, they're treated fairly, they recognize opportunities to progress, and they will want to continue to operate in that world. And so those are some of the big picture items that are working within the prevention portfolio. I know that there are a ton of questions. We got a bunch of feedback throughout the week. The staff's been around, they've been taking notes. We'll consolidate all of the concerns and feedback. I know the number one question that seems to always pop up is what's the deal with this quarterly funding? We're working on that. I'll make sure we got a good answer there. But again, anything that we can do that's within our power to control, to try and reduce the burden as you go out, as Admiral Timmy mentioned, you're that next mentor, you're that next person that's going to get them over that hump to want to join. I need to be in a position to make that as seamless as possible so that they can get in and start demonstrating the benefits and feeling the powerful connectiveness that this group has, not only with our active duty and our reserve workforce, but just the work that you do to protect the public. Being able to make that a seamless and really administratively seamless process is really one of the focuses that I, Troy, Amy, and the staff is really working toward. So I appreciate your time. I am not going to be able to stick around, assuming well, maybe I am. If Chaps had a VFR direct to the boss, my flight might get out of here. If not, I will be back here maybe later tonight and catch a flight tomorrow. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with everyone today, and look forward to actually seeing you again in October or in August down in Orlando. So thank you.
Thank you. Small talk. Thank you, Admiral. Mrs. Crecilius, do you have any announcements?
Yes, sir, I do.
Please share.
The Commodore is about to send you on a break. Please, DCOs especially, make sure you are back on time. Every vote counts, but it only counts if you're in your seat. So, with that,
I have 14:10 hours. Please be in your seat at 14:30 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please take your seats? Our program will begin in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I like our pace better too. They're a little more predictable. About a minute? Yeah, about a minute. Okay, if we could take our seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please take your seats? Our program is about to begin.
You want to step on a junior job here.
Good afternoon. I reconvene the meeting of the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary National Board meeting. In lieu of a roll call, I will ask the Deputy National Commodores to confirm the presence of their respective district commodores. Commodore Fred? Yes, sir. Thank you. Commodore Fury? Thank you, sir. Commodore Singler? Thank you, sir. As National Commodore, I will confirm the presence of the members of NEXCOM and the President of the National Association of Commodores. I have an announcement to make. We are currently under a tornado watch. I have had the Deputy Director, the Deputy NACO rather, I'm sorry, of RP Anthony Marzano, meet with the hotel management to determine what the protocols are. In the event, the unlikely event, that that watch is elevated to a warning, it will be announced throughout the hotel, and the shelter area is just outside these doors here. So, like Father Mode, I believe in the power of prayer, so we'll be fine. Okay, each member of the board received a copy of the minutes of the board meeting from our national meeting in August 19 and 20 of 2022, excuse me. At this time, I request a motion to waive the reading of those minutes. So moved. Commodore Fred made the motion, and it was seconded by Commodore Scamardo. The motion to waive the reading of the minutes from our national board has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion? There being no request for discussion sought, those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Mr. Kelton, did the motion pass? Motion passed. I will now entertain a motion to waive the adoption of the minutes from that board meeting of August 19 and 20 of 2022. Motion was made by Commodore Matrowski and second by, okay, Commodore Sirac. The motion to adopt the minutes of our national board meeting has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? There being no discussion sought, those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Mrs. Crecilius, would you please take count? Those opposed? Those abstain? The motion to adopt the minutes in the national board meeting from our national meeting has been passed. Is there any old business to be brought before the national board? Hearing none. Is there any new business to be brought before the national board? Hearing none. We will now consider the recommendations submitted for consideration and action by the National Board. Vice Commodore, I promoted you. I don't know how Admiral Poulin's going to feel about that. Vice Commodore Kirkwood, would you please present the recommendations?
All right, thank you. The recommendations have been discussed at area meetings, during the Committee of the Whole, and have been in your hands for at least 30 days. You received copies during the Committee of the Whole and should have them with you today. I will summarize each recommendation before it is considered. The actual text of the recommendation is what will go to BSX if the recommendation is approved by the board. I will now present the recommendations. Recommendation number 1 was submitted by Commodore Gus Formato in September of 2022 while in the role of VNACO. The subject is Aguilet wear for the Deputy ANACOs and NACO Executive Assistant. The vote required is adoption. Approval of this recommendation would modify the AUX manual to authorize the wear of the appropriate Aguilet for Deputy ANACO and NACO Executive Assistant to be consistent with the Commandant Instruction M1679.1G 10-32. Is there any further discussion? Is there a motion to approve this recommendation? Thank you. John Holmes? Who's the second? Curtis Hahn, thank you. All right. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Don't forget over here too, we've got, there you go. Okay. All those opposed, please raise your hands. All right. Would you two count the two opposed? Go ahead and please raise your hand if you're opposed. Okay. The recommendation is approved. Thank you. Recommendation number 2 is to reduce the national dues for youth members. The subject is reducing dues for youth members. This came from Commodore Pete Jensen back in November of 2022. The recommendation would reduce national dues by 50% for those members who are under 18 years of age. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation? From DCO 1, John Hume, okay. Is there a second? Scarmato, thank you. Is there discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, you can lower them. All opposed? Please raise your hands. All right, the recommendation is approved. Thank you. Recommendation number 3, amend Chapter 11, Section A.18 regarding anniversary streamers. This came from Director of W, Terry Barth, via ANACO of AS, Rich Mihelchik, in October of 2022. This recommendation seeks to amend Chapter 11, Section A.18 anniversary streamers, which describes the colors and streamers for their corresponding lettering for the 50th, 60th, 70th, and 75th charter date anniversaries. This recommendation would amend the AUX manual to include the provision for streamers for the 80th, 90th, and 100th anniversary of charter dates. The 80th would be blue with white lettering. The 90th would be purple with white lettering, and the 100 would be platinum with gold lettering. After 100 years, streamers can be requested every 25 years, such as 125, 150, etc., and the color and lettering of these streamers are to be determined at a later date by NACO. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation? John Holmes? Is there a second? Who was seconded? Sorry, John Hume? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for this, it's hard to read and see. Is there discussion? All right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed, raise your hands. Seeing none, this recommendation is approved. Thank you. Recommendation 4, the subject is establish a pathway for honorably discharged and/or retired members to join the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. This came from Richard McConnell, 8th Coastal Region, via DNACO Land Area West. This recommendation proposes to credit retired and/or honorably discharged Coast Guard personnel enrolling in the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary within 3 years of discharge or retirement with the training and qualifications attained during their U.S. Coast Guard service. There has been an amendment, a motion to amend this recommendation, and I'll read it as follows. To include that paragraph and add a second paragraph, current active duty or reservists joining the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary would be credited with the training and qualifications attained during their service and current at the time of their enrollment in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Okay. Do a motion next? Yep. So, all right. It needs a motion? All right. So first we will vote on that amendment. So all those in favor of adding that second paragraph as an amendment to the recommendation, please raise your hand. All right, please lower your hands. Any opposed, please raise your hand. All right. Seeing no opposed to the amendment, we'll go ahead and take a vote for the entire recommendation to include the original first paragraph for our retired and honorably discharged, and also to include our active duty and reservists who would like to join the auxiliary. So I'll entertain a motion. Scarmondo, thank you. A second? Back here. Stevens? All right, thank you. All those in favor of approving this recommendation and amendment, please raise your hand. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed, please raise your hands. All right, the recommendation has been approved. Thank you, and thank you, Patty, for the amendment came from DCO 9 Central, Patty Matrowski. Thank you for that. All right, let's go on to recommendation number 5 is to amend the auxiliary manual referencing the Auxiliary Diversity Award. This came from Tracy Schultz, ANACO Diversity, on 22 November 2022. This recommendation would amend the auxiliary manual to make the Auxiliary Diversity Award an annual award and allow for NACO discretion in the recognition of this award. The current wording in the auxiliary manual, section 11-19, states that this award is not an annual award, but rather shall be implemented in accordance with the following provisions at the discretion of the NACO. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation? John Holmes? Is there a second? Sunny, thank you. Is there discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, thank you. All opposed, please raise your hand. All right, sounds like the recommendation is approved. Thank you very much. The sixth recommendation The subject is paddlecraft operators awarded 1 point for each patrol hour towards earning the RBS insignia. This was submitted by D. Nakos from PAC area and Atlantic West. This recommendation provides that members earning the certification as paddlecraft operator be awarded 1 point for each patrol hour towards the RBS insignia. Is there a motion to approve this recommendation? Bert Surak, is there a second? Pete Scarmato, thank you. Is there a discussion? All right. All in favor, please raise your hand. All right, please lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. All right, the recommendation has been approved. Thank you. And this concludes the recommendations of this year. Thank you.
All right, it is now my pleasure to introduce personally the greatest sector commander that I have ever worked for and known, Captain Amy Beach. Captain Beach assumed the duties of Director of Inspections and Compliance at Coast Guard Headquarters in July of 2022. In this position, she develops and maintains policy, standards, and program alignment for all prevention activities associated with the safe operation of vessels and facilities. This directorate manages policy development and program oversight for the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary, recreational boating safety, foreign and domestic commercial vessel compliance inspections, international and domestic ports and facilities, safety and security, as well as vessel documentation and marine casualty investigations.
Thank
Captain
you,
Beach.
Kelly, and I did put her up to saying that I was the best sector commander. So
It was true, though.
Just
It was
so you
true.
know. But it's great to be here and to see so many auxiliarists from my 28 years here in the Coast Guard, whether it's from my time at MSU Savannah, D9 Prevention, or my last command, which was Sector Ohio Valley. It's great to be here and to see you all and get to catch up. I can't thank the auxiliary enough for all the work and service that you provide to the Coast Guard. And probably the one auxiliarist, and I told her I was going to talk about her, that has known me since day one is Commodore Matrowski. She was actually my very first roommate at OCS. So my OCS experience was started off on the wrong foot. I showed up a day late, though according to my orders, in my defense, I was a day early, which was my first introduction to checking and making sure admin gives you proper orders before you go somewhere. But apparently the right response is no excuse, sir, instead of, well, according to my orders, I'm a day early, because that just kind of puts a target on you. And so I missed dinner. Patty was nice enough to make sure that she brought something back from the galley, so I actually got to eat that night after the lieutenants were having a great time making my introduction into the Coast Guard very memorable and unique. But no, and it's great to see Patty. We also got to work together again at Sector. Now, no, not Del Bay, but it was Baltimore, but National Capital Region now. So it's great to see you after all these years. So I love the Commodore's watchwords, particularly inclusive. Inclusivity is important, and it's something that the Coast Guard in general continues to strive to do, and I'm really happy to see that it's one of your main watchwords. I think there's a lot of ways that we can find to allow people to serve, particularly in the auxiliary, and that we should be doing everything we can to knock down barriers where we can. And as Commander Glendie or Captain Glendie will attest to, that during the 5PC weekly meetings, I do often say, well, do we have any auxiliaries who can do that? Are there any auxiliaries who can do that? And I really push for the office chiefs to kind of think outside the box of what traditional auxiliary, recreational boating will always be important and primary, but what are some of the other ways that auxiliary can support? And I've always personally found that, you know, when we have auxiliary in the office, and the relationships that we build and the friendships that we build have been so important and valuable, not only to me personally, but I think to the Coast Guard. And one of the ways that we've used in kind of a different way auxiliary assistance has been in our Mariner Credential Fraud Task Force. So we learned that there were a number of schoolhouses that the Coast Guard had basically said, yes, you can go out and teach these courses for Mariner licensing. And they were engaging in fraud. They were passing folks that really couldn't pass the tests. There was unfortunately, a bit of inside Coast Guard that was assisting in that fraud. And DOJ opened up investigation, but we didn't necessarily have all the legal support and a lot of the investigative support that we would need from the active duty side. And we were able to bring in auxiliaries legal support as well as former police officers and investigators. And in the end, we adjudicated over 1,200 cases of suspected fraud. We initiated over 300 enforcement actions against mariners. And the invaluable legal and admin support that the auxiliary provided to assist us in the investigations, as well as the lessons learned, have helped us develop kind of long-term solutions to credentialing and modernize our system and how we go about doing that. And, it kind of hit home when, at first people were like, okay, that's certainly bad that people are getting credentials that they didn't earn. But when a life is lost because someone who had not passed the exam that they were supposed to pass, but had tried and tried, and the person was just like, okay, here you go, goes out on her first assignment to tow a vessel, and her vessel capsizes and she dies. We can't have those incidents happening, and we need to root out any of those cases where there's fraud within our licensing, and we could not have done it without the support of the auxiliary, so we thank you. In another kind of way that we've tried to get some assistance has been our Freedom of Information Act, that you have to respond to those within a certain amount of time, and we've had our contract canceled, and it's been very challenging to be able to keep up with the amount of FOIA requests that come in and our ability to respond to them. And it was another one of those meetings where I was like, do we have any auxiliaries who'd be willing, to come into the office and just help process these requests? And I was thinking maybe we'd get one or two, and that would be great. We got 12 auxiliaries who were coming in, and I mean, we are just able to go right down the line and start getting ourselves back to where we need to be in terms of the timeliness of these FOIA requests. It does require some special training because there's personally identifiable information in those things that have to be redacted. So, but just to be able to get 13 folks that had already had the training, knew what FOIA was, the amount of money that the Coast Guard is saving right now is unbelievable. So I mentioned Patty as, one of my, and I'm not going to mention you again other than to say that I mentioned you, Patty. Don't roll your eyes. But years ago, I was stationed at Sector Del Bay, and Steve Minatola was there. He's a Durox commander. I was a lieutenant. And we mostly came across each other when we were agreeing to do officer candidates boards. We seemed to be the two that were always willing to volunteer to do it. But he can attest, probably one of the biggest institutions in Del Bay over the years was an auxiliarist by the name of Manny Greenwald. And Manny came in nearly every day to sit on the quarterdeck, watch people as they would come in, check their IDs, answer the phones. He would train the non-rates. And he had been a chief in the Navy, I believe, right, in World War II? And he still carried some of that. So, like, the non-rates weren't allowed to fool around when Manny was on watch. And no one could get past the guy. I mean, he would stop you, with the exception of perhaps one person, Philly being, an interesting city. We did have one time a guy come in onto the quarterdeck, decide to disrobe, grab a fire extinguisher, run all the way down the passageway, out the back of the unit, down the pier, and jump into the river. And that was the only guy that Manny let go by. I'm not tackling him. Luckily, we did have some station folks that were already out there. It was both of them are kind of looking at each other like, who's going to grab the guy? I'm like, both of you grab him, please. He was saved. But Manny was definitely a fixture. Served well up into his 90s as an auxiliarist. I'd be in the gym, he'd be on the treadmill, walking and working out. He's just a well-known institution. I think Admiral Allen even went on what was going to be Manny's last day of being able to work to thank him for all of his service. And then, another one who had a huge impact on me was a man by the name of Clyde Bowman. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple months ago. But I first met Clyde when I was the CO at MSU Savannah, and he was basically our eyes and ears down in Brunswick. Brunswick, the port, is about an hour and 45 minutes from Savannah. And so when you'd get a call of a sheen, it's like, do we really want to, send folks to run down there? And we could call Clyde up any time of the day, any day of the week, and he would go out and he would tell us, yes, it's truly a sheen. You don't need to worry about it, or you need to get down here fast. There's about 500 gallons down here. And commercial fishing vessel, he's just such an amazing individual. And I was getting ready to do my change of command and told him I was really going to miss him and had enjoyed working with him. And I go up to my next assignment, D9 prevention, and about a year later, I walk into the office, and I walk down to Durox to ask him a question, and he's like, oh, by the way, there's someone who's working here now helping us out in the office that I want you to say hi to, and I was like, who's that? It was Clyde Bowman. He had moved from Georgia to Ohio. Now, not because of me. His daughter lived in Ohio, and he decided to make the move out there, but it was great to once again be able to work with him. I leave there, I go to Sector Ohio Valley, who shows up the very first time I go out to do a unit visit at MSU Huntington, Clyde Bowman. Show up at Cincinnati, there's Clyde Bowman. He's just a really amazing man and a loss to the auxiliary community and to me personally. But what I want you to take from that is don't underestimate the impact that you all have on the active duty and the relationship and how much that means to us. Keep doing what you're doing. It's a great service, and we are very lucky to have you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for the gift here.
Good Beach. It is a true honor and privilege for me to introduce Captain Troy Glendye. Captain Glendye is the chief.
Trying to get to the podium before you can just knock it off right after
I try to read slow. Thank you.
So first off, thank you for everything that you do for our Coast Guard. I am truly honored and privileged to be your chief director. I can say I've been in this position now for almost 2 years, and every day I am truly humbled by your dedication and professionalism. That whole thing, force multiplier, you are truly a force multiplier for our Coast Guard. It's evident this week. I know it's been a long week, long day, but over this past week, we've had 6 flag officers come to address you to show how important you are to our Coast Guard, with the Commandant, DCO, and even Admiral Sibley right now staying here through the afternoon with all the awards here. That just shows you how important you are to our Coast Guard. I want to also thank you personally. I know when I took over, I first said mentioned my history with the Coast Guard Auxiliary. I would not be standing here in this uniform if it was not for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. When I was a young 12, 13-year-old boy in Plymouth, Massachusetts, I had a boater safety course that was taught by multiple auxiliarists who all told me about this, hey, this Coast Guard thing. Hey, you should try this thing. I'm like, no, I want to go fly planes. And they're like, we should try this Coast Guard thing. It's like, I don't think Coast Guard has planes. And those auxiliarists showed me what the Coast Guard did. And then the AIM program. So I'm going to go back now. I'm not a 1970s graduate of the AIM program. Sorry, I'm not. 89, it was 89, right? I'm not. Darn, I was giving you some credit. I appreciate it. I can use it. That was it. So, there we go. So you're here to protect me. So that's what auxiliaries do. He's helping protect me here. So, but no, on a serious note, I went to AIM in 1995, and I'm so glad that I had that opportunity. No, same thing. So before we get down to some, I want to address here, bear with me, I want to address 5 different initiatives here that we have going within BSX, and then talk a little bit about the future, where I see the auxiliary moving out here in the next couple years and beyond there. So first off, I want to give a big shout out to my entire staff, which is all of y'all know by first name. They're all sitting in the back right there. Between NACON and now, we've had 8 policies that have been updated. And with that, with the amount of, as you know, either congressionals and different things that go on at headquarters, they've done a tremendous work. So I just want to give them a round of applause for all of that. Those different 8 guidances has been 2 policy letters, 1 SOP, 2 PQSs, 3 handbooks, and then 1 instruction manual, the Auxiliary Operations Manual, which is an instruction. But with that, as you can see with these handbooks, multiple of them have been discussed today, so I'm not going to go through each and every single one of them. You can find them all on our website. But all of these handbooks and so forth are being taken down from an instruction, because as you know, the maritime environment is constantly changing. So we need to be more agile in our guidance and instructions there to change with that. So with these handbooks and policy letters, it allows us in BSX to make the necessary changes to address whatever the needs are for recreational boating safety or other missions that we see the auxiliary taking on. Second thing I'd like to discuss is the Auxiliary Uniform and Appearance Pilot Program. As you know, we came to a close of that pilot program on December 2022. Sorry, I got that written down wrong in my notes there. And District 1 Southern Region and District 8 Coastal Region was our original pilot programs. But specifically with the AWU, it was such a popular uniform item that we opened it up nationally. From that, we've had over, I think, 6,700 orders of the AWU. So the importance of that policy is, I'm going to talk a little bit about brand at headquarters here. The Coast Guard Auxiliary brand is so high right now. And with that uniform policy, we want to make sure that in every aspect that the auxiliary is out there representing our Coast Guard, that it gives you the best brand that we could possibly do. So that is the main reasoning behind that. So you're going to see a final instruction on that here coming, I believe it's summer, probably around NACON is when I'll be able to announce that final. Because we had some feedback from that SOP, but pretty much there was just some minor tweaks and changes that will go from there. All right, well, I can talk about our training department within BSX. As you mentioned before, we had a vacant billet. With that, I just would like Mr. David Goff, if you could stand up in the back of the room for those who have not met him over this week. He just checked in on the 13th of March, comes to us with a very, very impressive background, came from Brown, did a lot of work, almost, I think, 5 to 10 years with the Peace Corps training and so forth, so we're very lucky to have him. And we're excited because that billet's been vacant for about 2 or 3 years now. So if you haven't met him, Mr. David Goff. So I do want to mention, though, the people that stepped up. As many of you know, it's been about 2 or 3 years that vacant has essentially been vacant. So Wine Wentober and Lieutenant Booth stepped up to the plate and took on that extra duty. But more importantly, we had auxiliarists filling those roles. We had Jenny Stack and Commodore Don Zinner. I'm deeply saddened, of course, many of you know, Don passed away about a month or two ago, but he gave not only a lot of work to the auxiliary, but over 10 years dedicated to BSX and helping us through that, so. All right, next thing I want to talk about is the patrol orders. I know that was a huge issue with FSMS. There is still some issues we're working through. I'm proud to say that fiscal year 22 has been all paid out for. I know there were some issues last year. Fiscal year 21 orders at this time we're still having issues getting paid. So that's complete. Master Chief did a tremendous job matching up all the poets with the different patrols. We're still working through our FSMS. I know it's one thing we've got to get back to you on is I think there's with whether it be a CR or different, the way that initially FSMS was rolled out was it looked like a quarterly basis, but in reality it's not. We just really ask that your DIROXs work with your funds managers because that essentially is not the case. And so there's some more education that's going out there, but if there's any questions with that, please come to BSX and we'll help you. There's definitely some workarounds with that. And along those lines, I thank you for your patience as we dealt with the FSMS. I think last year we were talking about it. Just active duty was going through the same thing, and you all were tremendously resilient and just staying on board and trudging through that obstacle. Finally, as far as the southwest border, I know it's been talked a lot about here, but I want to celebrate that. A little bit later this afternoon, we have some recognition right here but that truly was a historic event for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. As Commodore Saunders mentioned, this is the first time we deployed auxiliarists without active duty or reservists this past winter there. And with that, as was mentioned, the political capital that you gained within our department was tremendous. So much, I know I've been touting this a little bit, as the Deputy Secretary has their application in to join the auxiliary. So they'll become an active auxiliarist as soon as they leave that position. So I mean, that just shows you the impression that you left upon them. Moving forward, we do promise, I know some of those folks that have deployed, there was some issues. When I was talking to Commodore Saunders earlier, I shared with him our the Coast Guard cyber instruction. We're going to look to do something similar to that so we can so it can be a little bit more streamlined and not maybe as chaotic as the mission comes up here and have a doctrine on that. So we'll be working on that, and hopefully you'll be seeing something. Hopefully I'll have something better, some good reports to come out here in NACON. Now, as far as moving forward with the future of the auxiliary, so I am going to say, Commodore Lowry, you're going to like this. Still, RBS is our #1 mission. I knew I was getting applause from the front row at least there, so. However, as the Commandant has mentioned, the sky is truly the limit for the missions that the auxiliary can do. I mean, we have right now an AUX Integration Award, which is helping shape behavior from active duty to further integrate and come up with different ways that they can integrate the auxiliary, whether it be through a DCMS or it's a support role, enhanced operation, innovation, or DIROX of the Year award. And we'll be able to announce those awardees come this summer here at NACON here. But that's once again to shape the behavior of further integrating auxiliarists into active duty missions. And then of course the gap analysis, we talked a lot about that. We're gonna learn from that. And that gap analysis, sorry, I'm stealing your words there, NACO, on this, but this gap analysis can continue because it's gonna change. There's gonna be missions that are gonna pop up. There's gonna be shortages that we're gonna know. We're gonna have to constantly update that to further integrate the auxiliary into our all of our everyday missions there. So I've talked about brand. The Coast Guard Auxiliary brand is the best I've ever seen it. It doesn't go through a day that I'm not at headquarters, whether it be virtually or in the office, that I get a question, can the auxiliary do this? And I'm glad that Captain Beach mentioned the help within INV for the Freedom of Information Act, going through those. It was a matter of 2 weeks where it was brought up, where we immediately had, I think you had 12 that were actually went through and vetted, but we had even more that was coming up that haven't gotten briefed up because the 10 was all we needed. That was in a matter of 2 weeks. That is just tremendously impressive. We have other missions like contracting that I never would have thought about 10 years ago, 5-10 years ago, that we would even be in that business of helping out that. So I see I'm getting it down to 26 seconds here. It's a Friday afternoon. Sorry, I'm taking my entire time here. So I just want to end on this note that I truly thank you for what you do for our nation and, more importantly, our Coast Guard. Thank you.
gift. I have a note.
Okay, got a special announcement up here. So Jenny Stack, so I just had to make sure it wasn't something else, because I'll be like Anchorman here and say something else. So, because I will do that, many of you know that. So Jenny Stack has recommended Jamie Griffith to fill in and become backup for her. Jamie has agreed to work with Jenny and Mr. Goff. Good training, yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Captain. All right, Lieutenant Booth, would you please join me at the podium? Rear Admiral Sibley, Captain Glendy, Commodore Formato, if you'll go down to the front, please. If you received an email that you are receiving an award or you're getting an award for on behalf of somebody else, if you could come over here so we don't have to find you. Thank you.
We are honored to be given the opportunity to recognize some of our dedicated members for their exemplary service between November 2020 and October 2022. Everyone, please hold your applause until. Though the awardees are not in attendance, the following 4 Auxiliary Achievement Medals are being awarded for their accomplishments with the AIM program. All the awards are signed by Captain Troy Glendy, Chief, Office of Auxiliary and Boating Safety. Commodore John Holmes, would you please come forward to accept the following award? Citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Achievement Medal Gold Star in lieu of a second to Mr. Jose Montijo Roman, United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Mr. Montijo Roman proficiently and enthusiastically supported the development of the Coast Guard Academy Admissions Partners Program in Atlantic Area East, especially among Caribbean island nations. He mentored 10 Academy admissions partners across Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John, often traveling great distances to meet and train these newly appointed program participants in person. Commodore Holmes, you may be seated. Would Commodore Brock Stevens please come forward to accept the following award? Citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Achievement Medal to Mr. James Wolf, United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Mr. Wolf mentored over 20 Academy admissions partners throughout the region by employing an effective combination of innovative teleconferencing and personal travel across great distances to meet and train newly appointed program participants in person. His steadfast efforts were particularly critical during challenging periods when mentors were in short supply. Mr. Wolf worked closely with the Coast Guard Academy's Chief of Mentoring Programs to develop insightful and innovative mentoring tools and processes tailored for diverse regional cultures. Commodore Stevens, you may be seated. Would Commodore Sonny Thatch please come forward to accept the following 2 awards? Citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Achievement Medal, Gold Star in lieu of a second, to Mrs. Carol M. Johnson, United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Mrs. Johnson performed over 2,000 hours of AIM Partners program management by diligently interacting with more than 500 AIM candidates, 100 of whom ultimately became commissioned officers in the United States Coast Guard. Applying superb program experience and leadership skill, she expertly developed and maintained incisive AIM program protocols, charts, and guidelines. He provided over 500 auxiliaries, 150 military personnel, 250 Coast Guard Academy alumni, and 300 Coast Guard Academy cadet parents with astute mentorship and guidance that developed them into an incredibly capable AIM program support cadre. And citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Achievement Medal, Gold Star in lieu of a second, to Mr. John Johnson. Mr. Johnson performed over 2,500 hours of AIM program support by diligently interacting with more than 500 Coast Guard Academy AIM candidates, 100 of whom ultimately became commissioned officers in the United States Coast Guard. Commodore Thatch, you may be seated. Commodore John Holmes, would you please come forward to accept the following 2 awards? Citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Commendation Medal, Gold Star in lieu of a 7th, to Commodore Kenneth E. Jacobs, United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Commodore Jacobs is cited for outstanding achievement while serving as Branch Chief Academy Mentor from November 2020 to August 2022. Demonstrating exceptional competence and initiative, Commodore Jacobs proficiently and enthusiastically performed targeted Coast Guard recruiting service in a broad range of underserved and underrepresented communities. And as an Academy liaison, he effectively mentored 270 auxiliary partners despite the immense challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And citation to accompany the award of the Auxiliary Legion of Merit, Gold Star in lieu of a second, posthumously presented to Commodore Donald A. Zinner, United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Commodore Zinner is cited for outstanding meritorious service as Executive Assistant for Auxiliary Training Program Management to the Chief Director of Auxiliary from November 2020 to August 2022, and is the Auxiliary Safety System Program Advisor for the Coast Guard Safety Program Management Division, CG 1131, from November 2020 to December 2021. Demonstrating outstanding vision and mastery of auxiliary operational programs, he skillfully guided the Auxiliary Training Program as Executive Assistant to the Chief Director of Auxiliary and provided invaluable coverage as the CGBSX Training Manager during the position's nearly year-long vacancy. He coordinated 17 different auxiliary sea schools, supervised their lead instructors, managed over $1.8 million in training funds, and forged strong working relationships with the Coast Guard Force Readiness Command and the Education and Training Quota Management Command. Applying exemplary commitment to service, Commodore Zinner designed and implemented novel virtual options for auxiliary training during the COVID-19 pandemic. As a direct result of his superb leadership, the auxiliary convened more than 60 classes that trained over 1,200 auxiliary leaders, operators, and program managers. He developed dynamic leadership strategies and informative training materials that increased successful implementation of key concepts and fostered a pronounced safety culture across the auxiliary. Commodore Zinner's ability, diligence, and devotion to duty are most heartily commended and are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Signed, Linda L. Fagan, Admiral, United States Coast Guard, Commandant. Mr. Roy Savoca, would you please come forward to accept a meritorious team award for the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Imagery Analysis Support Team? The Commandant of the United States Coast Guard takes pleasure in presenting the Coast Guard Meritorious Team Commendation to the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Imagery Analysis Support Team for the service set forth in the following. Citation: for exceptionally meritorious service from December 2021 to November 2022, while supporting the Maritime Search and Rescue Initiative for the Office of the Secretary of Defense's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Coast Guard auxiliaries volunteered 11,520 hours serving as maritime imagery analysis, performing detailed frame-by-frame analyses of full-motion video data collected from Coast Guard fixed-wing aircraft sorties using the electro-optical and shortwave infrared sensors of the Minotaur Mission Management System. Imagery analysis were drawn from all auxiliary regions and participated in several weekend training sessions, starting with a 16-hour initial introduction to data labeling techniques, instrumental for developing training data for machine learning. During this period, auxiliaries filled 30 analyst positions, often working more than 10 hours per week, increasing the labeling capacity of the computer vision data pipeline. The auxiliary team analyzed over 1,500 clips of full motion video and performed over 7,500 individual annotations of maritime objects. Additionally, these auxiliaries produced several hundred gigabytes of training data, which was critical in the development of computer vision maritime detection algorithms, which greatly improved existing Coast Guard aircraft sensors. The dedication, pride, and professionalism displayed by the Coast Guard Auxiliary Imagery Analysis Support Team are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. For the Commandant, P.W. Gautier, Vice Admiral, U.S. Coast Guard, Deputy Commandant for Operations. following members are receiving awards for their participation in missions assisting at the southwest border in 2022. Commodore Tracy DeLauder, whose award will be received by Commodore Stevens. Commodore Douglas W. Eubanks, whose award will be received by Commodore Stevens. Commodore Kenneth E. Jacob, whose award will be received by Commodore Holmes. And Mr. Eddie J. Puckett, whose award will be received by Commodore Whitaker. Would you please come forward? These members are receiving an Auxiliary Achievement Medal and are cited for outstanding achievement. And are excited for outstanding achievement while serving directly or in support of Customs and Border Protection operations in the Southwest Border region at the request of the Department of Homeland Security from May 2022 through November 2022. Their technical expertise and dedication led to the success of the Southwest Border mission. Their management capabilities enabled the Coast Guard Auxiliary to successfully achieve a first-of-its-kind deployment in support of the Department of Homeland Security. Your diligence, perseverance, and devotion to duty are most heartily commended and are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Commodore Holmes and Commodore Whitaker, you may be seated. The following members will be receiving an Auxiliary Commendation Medal. Mr. Robert Kumpf, Mr. Thomas Roberson, whose award will be received by Commodore Serac, and Commodore Robert Tippett, whose award will be received by Commodore Stevens. These members are cited for outstanding achievement while serving on the Incident Management Auxiliary Coordination Cell from 23 May 2022 to 22 November 2022. It demonstrated exceptional organizational insight and expertise in the aid of the administrative workflow that it directly managed the applications of over 295 auxiliaries applying for deployment to the southwest border in support of Customs and Border Protection operations at the request of the Department of Homeland Security. Your dedication of over hundreds of hours devoted to this single mission ultimately led to the deployment of over 100 auxiliaries in support of the Southwest Border Mission, which enabled the Coast Guard Auxiliary to successfully achieve first-of-its-kind deployment in support of the Department of Homeland Security. Your dedication, judgment, and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Commodore Thatch and Commodore Serac, you may be seated. The following members will be receiving an Auxiliary Letter of Commendation Award. Mr. Marius Landar, whose award will be received by Commodore Hahn. Mr. Michael Mitchell. Mr. Bernard Morosco, whose award will be received by Commodore Stevens. And Mr. Robert Puharek, whose award will be received by Commodore Scamardo. I note with pride and am pleased to commend you for your performance of duty while serving as an on-site team leader for the Auxiliary Southwest Border Deployment from May 2022 to November 2022. As team leader, you are an advocate and coordinator for your auxiliary team members, ensured all training and safety measures were completed, and assisted with the overall administration, logistics, and management of the mission. You are commended for your outstanding performance of duty, and by your meritorious service, you have upheld the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Thank you. You may be seated. Next, Commodore Frederick Saunders will be receiving an Auxiliary Legion of Merit. Commodore Saunders is cited for outstanding meritorious service while serving as the head of the Incident Management Auxiliary Coordination Cell from 23 May 2022 to 22 November 2022. Demonstrating exceptional organizational insight and expertise He skillfully led the Emergency Management and Disaster Response Directorate in a first-of-its-kind auxiliary deployment to support Department of Homeland Security operations at the southwest border. Under his superb leadership and management, the IMAC dedicated over 3,000 hours managing complex logistics and vetting processes for 295 auxiliaries that applied for deployment and support of Customs and Border Protection operations over the course of 6 months. Commodore Saunders worked closely with senior active duty Coast Guard leaders throughout this operation, providing comprehensive status updates and program recommendations on a weekly basis to the Coast Guard's Deputy Director of Emergency Management, as well as the Chief Director of Auxiliary. Commodore Saunders' ability, diligence, and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard and the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary. Signed, Linda L. Fagan, Admiral, United States Coast Guard, Commandant. "140 Auxiliaries volunteers have supported the Customs and Border Protection operations at the southwest border in Eagle Pass, Texas. These members performed various activities to include personal property management and food services. These auxiliaries allowed CBP to mitigate the largest migration year in recent history by dedicating nearly 13,000 hours in direct boots-on-the-ground support at the southwest border, helping process over 320,000 immigrants. Your dedication to the Coast Guard, Department of Homeland Security, and the nation is greatly appreciated. You are awarded and authorized to wear the Coast Guard Special Operations Ribbon. Congratulations to these members.
All right, Captain, you're up.
I'm now pleased to present today's final award for members participating in the Mariner Credentialing Fraud Task Force. 8 auxiliarists and Lieutenant Christopher Booth are among the 83 Coast Guard members receiving this award. I believe the following individuals are already up there, correct? Anthony Carter. He's not present. All right, I see Commodore Rich Mihalchak, Lieutenant Christopher Booth. The following auxiliaries will also receive this award, but are not in attendance. Commodore Douglas Cream, Commodore Joseph Giantasio, Sean Landa, Gaspari Marturano, Randy Patton, John Michael Zimmerly. The Commandant of the United States Coast Guard takes pleasure in presenting the Coast Guard Meritorious Team Commendation to Mariner Credentialing Fraud Task Force for service as set forth in the following. Citation: for exceptional meritorious service from 20 August 2020 to 31 December 2022, while serving on the Deputy Commandant for Operations Mariner Credentialing Fraud Task Force. Facing unprecedented threats posed by sophisticated criminal fraud schemes, the multidisciplinary team, comprised of more than 70 active duty, reserve, civilian, and auxiliary members from across the Coast Guard, swiftly mobilized to target and remove fraudulent obtained merchant mariner credentialings worldwide. By upholding the Coast Guard's commitment to the safety, competency, and suitability of licensed mariners, working on Coast Guard attained those unprecedented enforcement results, which served as a deterrent to future fraudulent activity and enhanced the safety of our nation's marine transportation system. The dedication, pride, and professionalism displayed by each member of the Mariner Credentialing Fraud Task Force reflect great credit upon themselves, their respective commands, and the United States Coast Guard. For the Commandant, signed Wayne R. Arguin, Rear Admiral, U.S. Coast Guard, Assistant Commandant for Prevention.
All right. Before we move on, Ms. Barth, quick announcements.
So this, am I live? So this isn't actually an award, but it is an important presentation for all of your districts. And so we, in anticipation that the 80th anniversary streamer recommendation would pass, we have those here for all the district commodores to take back with the certificates that go along with them. This is what they look like. So you'll get these. Please make sure that you check your packages. And there are also some 70th, some 60th, some 50th, whatever your units are deserving of. Any that we were lacking that weren't in inventory will be shipped to you, but we wanted to make sure that you had these for presentation. Oops, give you these. So yeah, don't go home without them. Please, please. Thank you. And then also, you know, we're always honored when our active duty joins the auxiliary, whether they're in, you know, currently serving, whether they're retired or whatever. And as you heard today, a recommendation was approved, making it a little easier and maybe more inviting for them to join us. They have so much information and knowledge and experience to offer us. So it's really great when we can have them join us and help us support the Coast Guard in their missions. One of my favorite retirees who joined the auxiliary is the prior chaplain of the Coast Guard, Captain Thomas Walcott. Now, he isn't just a member, but he's also a driving force on the national staff as the deputy director of the G Directorate. Chaplain Walsh, would you please join me up here? Because it is going to be my honor to recognize you as a member of the national staff by presenting you with your national staff officer pin.
Excuse me, did you see him do this, or did he allegedly do it?
He could finally actually spell the full name, could actually spell.
I will wear this with some emotion.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to the team. And those devices are not refundable, so you have to keep it. All right. We would now like to recognize some of our active duty members that are going to be retiring this year. Commodore Kirkwood, if you'll come up.
All right, the following are retiring soon but unable to be in attendance today. Commander Matt Shibler, D8, East-West. Commander Mikab Bonner, D1 Southern. Commander David Block, District 5 Southern. Chief Warrant Officer Jimmy Laird, D1 Southern. And D14 Aux Affairs Specialist Mr. Don Arancia, civilian, retired 12/31/22. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the floor? Hearing none, Mrs. Barth, I turn it over to you.
Actually, sir, it's me. The new guy.
Mrs. Crecilius, when I fail to take my script to the podium with me, this is what occurs.
Old habits die hard, sir, I get it. All right, couple of announcements. All hands social will begin this evening, 1800 in the foyer or tornado evacuation area right outside this foyer in here. Reminder to those traveling on Coast Guard Auxiliary Association orders, same as I said before, make sure you don't have any hotel tax or hotel charges on there. And make sure you get your reimbursement claims in a week, please. After 30 days, they will not be approved. Make sure that your receipts and everything look exactly like you need if you've checked out early or anything. Transportation to the airport on Saturday and Sunday, the shuttle will begin running at 0500 in the morning, and the last shuttle runs until 22:30 in the evening. To take the shuttle to the airport, attendees should wait in the hotel lobby, and the shuttle driver will come in and announce airport. This shuttle runs every 30 minutes as well. And just a reminder, while everybody has their pen in their hand and a paper in front of them, NACON 2023 is just around the corner. The dates are August 16th through the 20th at the Rosen Center in Orlando, Florida. Hope to see you all there. And with that, sir.
Mrs. Crecilius, you'll be happy to know I brought the script with me this time.
Perfect.
I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting of the National Board. Do I have a motion? Commodore Holmes, and seconded by Commodore Sirac. All in favor? Opposed? Don't you dare. The meeting is adjourned. You're not making